You see that line right there? That's the finish line. Everything else behind it, just backfilled waste. But what's left in front of Parker Schnabel is the last strip of pay dirt, and it could make or break everything. This isn't Vegas. There's no roulette wheel or lucky dice, just frozen ground, diesel-fueled machines, and a dream hanging by a thread. Parker didn't throw $15 million into Dominion Creek for a thrill. He did it because failure wasn't an option. Fuel costs, equipment wear, weather risks, every ounce of gold pulled from the earth had to justify the cost, or it was game over. This is the story of a high-stakes gamble, a season on the edge, and a final weigh-in that could either crown him king of the Yukon, or leave him with nothing but regret. Parker Schnabel was once the Yukon's golden boy, a prodigy who turned overlooked dirt into millions. But even legends run out of ground. At Scrivener Creek, the heart of his empire was drying up. The easy gold was gone, and each yard of paid dirt yielded less than the one before. The sluice boxes still roared, but their glitter had dimmed. The crew felt it, the same brutal hours, the same backbreaking labor, but with less to show for it. Parker stood at a crossroads familiar to every Klondike miner: shrink or risk it all. That's it. That's the last one, he said quietly, staring at the final load of dirt. Downsizing wasn't just about numbers, it meant saying goodbye to a crew that had become like family. And for a man defined by ambition, pulling back felt like betrayal. But what choice did he have, when the gold was running out? Parker Schnabel first took the reins from his legendary grandfather, John Schnabel, and with that legacy on his shoulders, failure was never an option. So when his once profitable ground began to run dry, Parker faced an unthinkable decision: retreat and shrink his dreams, or risk it all in search of something bigger. That something was Dominion Creek. Known across the Yukon as a legendary claim, Dominion promised riches buried beneath the earth, but they came with a brutal catch. 40 feet of frozen overburden, worthless muck, sat on top of the gold like a cement lid. Getting to the pay layer meant moving mountains, millions of cubic yards of ice-cold earth using a non-stop fleet of massive machines. The cost? Astronomical. The land alone cost millions. Add to that the heavy equipment, dozers, rock trucks, excavators, and a full-time crew working in shifts around the clock, guzzling thousands of gallons of diesel each day. It wasn't just a gamble. It was an all-in, no-turning-back bet on Parker's future. "Chris, you got a copy? We're ready for cleanup at Rock Sand," came the call. The last of the paid dirt was in the plant, now it was time to find out if the risk had paid off. The $15 million number wasn't made up, it was a hard-nosed estimate of how much it would cost to break even in the first year. Parker had a loan, a line of credit, and a lot of weight on his shoulders that he carried into every decision. Every breakdown wasn't just a delay, it cost a lot of money. Every strategic choice about where to strip ground and where to put the wash plant cost a lot of money. Under the roar of the engines, there was a steady low-level hum of anxiety. He wasn't just a miner anymore, he was the CEO of a huge, high-risk startup, and his investors were waiting. Machines move dirt, but people move machines. Parker's. The crew was the beating heart of the Dominion operation. They put in the long hours, the biting wind, and the constant mud. At the top of the chain of command was Tyson, the foreman, whose calm demeanor belied his sharp tactical mind. He was in charge of turning Parker's big-picture plans into the day-to-day movements of men and steel on the cut. And then there was Mitch, a workhorse whose loyalty to Parker was written into every long day he put in. The team's core, the guys who show up, do the work, and ask what's next. The season had been a grind, a 6-month marathon that had kept them away from their families, birthdays, and life outside of the mine site bubble. One afternoon, as the season was coming to an end and the final push was in full swing, something happened that showed more about the operation than any gold total could have. Mitch was dirty and tired, and he knew that his daughter's birthday was coming up. He was going to miss this important event. Parker told him to go pack his bags, which went against the harsh logic of the gold business. "You've got a pregnant wife and a daughter's birthday to get home to, don't you?" he asked. Parker asked him in a way that left no room for argument. I was shocked that you left early during the most important part of the season. That had never happened before. But Parker insisted, you guys fought through, you've put in a hell of a season. Get out of here. It was a small act, but it meant everything. It was an acknowledgement of the human cost. It showed the crew that Parker saw their sacrifices and knew their lives went beyond the borders of Dominion Creek. It was an investment in loyalty more valuable than any piece of equipment. As Mitch drove off, the rest of the crew felt relieved and grateful. They knew their boss still saw them, even though he was under a lot of stress. Leaders who treat their employees like people, not just parts of a machine, are what turn a group of workers into a team willing to go to war for you. The beast at the center of it all, to handle the huge job at Dominion Creek. Parker knew he needed a monster, so he found one and named it Roxanne. Roxanne was his huge wash plant, a machine so big it looked like a metal building. It wasn't just a machine, it was the heart of the whole mine. Imagine a towering structure made of steel beams, long moving belts, and huge metal screens. It was built to do. It was everyone's job to find tiny pieces of gold hidden in huge piles of rock and dirt. The machines worked together like a team, with strong ones doing their part and careful ones being careful. The big excavators did the digging, like huge metal dinosaurs with huge metal claws. They dug deep into the ground to find the layer of gravel and sand where gold has been hiding for thousands of years. The person driving the excavator had to be very careful. Skilled, they had to get it just right. If they dug too high, they'd get useless dirt, and if they dug too low, they'd waste time. Every time the excavator's bucket picked up the pay dirt, it would swing around and dump it into the back of a rock truck. These weren't just any trucks, they were huge, heavy-duty machines that could carry as much as 10 elephants. Then it was hard for the rock truck drivers because they had to drive on slick, wet roads cut into the side of the mine. One mistake and they would be in big trouble. They carefully drove to the bottom of Roxanne, where the real washing would start at the base of the wash plant. The pile of paid dirt didn't stay dry for long. A crew member would aim a huge water cannon called a monitor at the pile. This machine shot out a strong stream of water, like a fire hose but much stronger. The water blasted the hard-packed dirt, turning it into a thick, muddy soup called a slurry. Making the slurry was important because you can't. To get hard dirt to move and sort gold, you have to mix it with water. The muddy river of slurry was then pushed up a long ramp and dumped on top of rock sand. This is where the sorting began. The first stop was the shaker deck, which was a set of big shaking screens that worked like a giant kitchen strainer. The screens would shake back and forth very quickly, making a loud rumbling sound that you could feel in your feet. As the muddy water flowed over the screens, all the big rocks bigger than a baseball would get bounced around. The rocks that weren't needed would go down a chute and land in a huge pile next to the machine. This pile would get as big as a hill by the end of the season. But the smaller pieces of rock, sand, and gold could get through the holes in the screen. This material, which was still mixed with water, then went into long metal channels called slee boxes. Those little boxes are the most important part of the machine. There were grooved and ridged rubber mats on the bottom of these channels. Gold is very heavy, much heavier than sand or rocks of the same size. As the muddy water rushed through the small boxes, the light sand and small rocks were easily washed along and flowed right out the other end of the machine. But the heavy gold flakes would sink to the bottom and get stuck in the ridges of the miner's moss, like coins stuck in a car's thick carpet. For this to work, the water had to be moving just the right speed, too slowly too. The box would get too full of mud too quickly, and the water could wash the gold away with the rocks for months. Roxanne had been roaring and rumbling all day and night. The crew heard it first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. It was the sound of work, progress, and money being spent in the hopes of finding gold. But now that sound was gone, the roaring had stopped, a strange, heavy silence fell over the mine site. The crew stood at the edge of the opening. Of the money pit, the big hole they had dug all season, they were done. You know what that is right there. The finish line, one of the workers said. He pointed to a clear line in the dirt. On one side was the bottom of the pit they had dug, and on the other was the wall of dirt they hadn't touched. There was no more pay dirt to dig. The excavator operator slowly and carefully picked up the last bucket of dirt. It was a special moment, and he dumped it into Roxanne's truck. Hopper, the water pumps ran for a few more minutes to get rid of the last bits of dirt. Then they turned everything off, and the only sound was the cold wind blowing through the valley. They had done everything they could. The big bet was now out of their hands, and the answer to whether all their hard work had paid off was now locked away inside Roxanne's metal guts. This time, the walk to the gold room felt different. It wasn't just the end of a long week, it was the season. This was the last test outside of the small locked building. The whole crew, including mechanics and truck drivers who were usually busy with other tasks, stood. You could see both hope and tiredness on their faces. They had worked hard through the cold and mud for 6 months. Now it was up to Parker and Chris, his gold room expert, to count the scores inside the small secure room. The final cleanup began. First, they had to get the miners' moss mats out of the boxes, which was hard because the mats were heavy with water. They carefully lifted the mats out of the ground and took them to large tubs. They used hoses to wash the mats very carefully, making sure that every bit of the trapped material called concentrate fell into the tubs. The most important thing on the whole mine site was this dark, heavy mud. The room was tight, you could almost feel it. Parker was quiet. He wasn't joking around like he usually did. He had a very serious look on his face. He knew the numbers in his head to make it to season. 7,000 ounces is the goal. 174 ounces of gold were needed for the final cleanup. That was a good amount, and he thought it was possible, but he needed a monster weigh-in to really show that his $15 million bet was a good one. After the gold was separated, it was carefully scooped into a pan and dried with a torch. Finally, it was ready, and what he saw was an amazing sight, a heavy, shining pile of pure Yukon gold. Parker took the first container of gold and carried it over to the computer scale. The crew leaned against the small window and watched his every move while holding their breath. Parker put the gold on the scale and the red numbers on the screen started to rise quickly: 40, 80, 120, 140, 170. He had already weighed more than 174 ounces, which was his goal. The crew outside laughed and cheered nervously as a huge weight was lifted, but the numbers kept going up: 200, 240, 2460. When the scale finally stopped at 300 ounces, a huge cheer went through the crowd. The primary part of the cleanup changed into a remarkable result. However, they weren't completed. There was every other larger jar of gold from the relaxation of the cleanup. Parker cautiously started including this gold to the dimensions: 50, 100, 150, 180, 200, 220, 240. The very last number flickered for a second, after which held constant: 254.350. Parker did the maths out loud. The full for the week was 554.35 on the price of gold that day. It became well worth over $1.1 million. They'd earned over $1 million in a single week. It became the most important cleanup of the entire season. The feeling of comfort changed into huge, accurate by guy, stated Tyson the foreman, slapping Parker at the returned, accurate vicinity to name home. However, the biggest wide variety, the only that actually mattered, was the entire for the whole season. Parker walked over to his laptop. He had stored a careful document of every weigh-in from the beyond 6 months. The group went quiet once more, watching him. He typed within the very last numbers he grew to become to the team and said, "Our season overall is 7,381.10 for the season." The number seemed to dangle in the air for a second, then it sank in $7,381.10. It turned into worth simply underneath $15 million. They'd achieved it in a single lengthy, hard and demanding season. They had determined enough gold to earn again almost the entire quantity of Parker's huge $15 million wager. The gamble hadn't just paid off, it had been an astonishing fulfillment, extra than a paycheck. The party that accompanied wasn't just about the cash, it was approximately survival and vindication. Parker, protecting a bottle of champagne, addressed his team, his voice typically so confident and assertive, cracked with emotion. This was for them, but first he poured a piece onto The floor a libation that is to people who helped you get began those who helped you alongside the way however are not right here to share. He said it was a silent tribute to his grandfather John, the person who had instilled in him the love for gold mining. Then came the actual marvel. Parker reached into a field. He had taken a number of the first gold that they had mined from Dominion and had it melted down. Chris the gold room professional had crafted it into custom tokens, small tangible pieces of their victory. He passed one to every crew member. They are exchangeable for one meal at the kitchen, he joked, but every person understood the actual cost. It wasn't simply gold, it was a medal. It was proof that they were there, that they had been a part of the team that tamed Dominion Creek. The team became visibly moved. Certainly one of them spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. I think I communicate for everybody here that thanks for locating us a home. That one phrase, domestic, captured the essence of the entire season. They were not just nomadic miners anymore chasing the dregs of a demise claim. They'd a foundation. They had a future, a place where they may paintings for years yet to come. Parker, looking on the faces of his team, felt the full weight of the adventure raise. We started out in one of these precarious position with floor, he reflected. I am just actually relieved we have an unreal venture with an unreal group of people, and the floor's manner better than something we have mined earlier than. The relaxation was no longer just financial, it was existential. He had secured their collective future. What do you think is the actual degree of fulfillment in a place just like the Klondike? Let us understand within the feedback and subscribe for extra memories from the threshold of the gold rush.